Welcome back. So let's just talk a bit about the architecture that we are going to use in this application and also why architectures are actually important for any software, right? So when we build a very simple application like the one I built in the last series where we pretty much just, let me show you, it was pretty much just a big program right here and it was very simple. It was just a simple menu that you could just click with the console app. It's no problem. We can keep the architecture as simple as this, meaning there's no architecture, right? All I had was pretty much just a main method, and then I had a single customer class that should represent what the customer should be, right? That's fair enough. It's a simple application, and I'm the only one who's going to maintain this application, and it's not going to be maintained that long because it's just for a simple course, so it's probably going to be thrown in the trash very soon. Since Microsoft keeps evolving that .NET Core, this probably won't be valuable for that much longer. So this is a simple application. I don't need architecture, right? But when you start building real application, production-ready application, something that a customer needs to use for many years, maybe you even have a team that grows, so you have, instead of 2 developers, you have 10 developers, they need to work together. You'll have technology that changes. Maybe the NT framework won't be the cool framework. Don't worry, we'll get back to the NT framework. Maybe there'll pop up a new framework that you need to use. So we need to kind of make our application so that we can change frameworks. Maybe we don't want to use Angular in the future. Maybe we want to start using Vue.js or maybe React. So we need to also prepare our application for that, right? So there's so many things that can change, and that's why we kind of, using object-oriented program, kind of make our application ready for these changes. And that's why you need an architecture. Now, Microsoft have made this page right here. I'll put the description in the description. I'll add a link so you can go and find it. You don't have to put this in there. And they talk about common web application architectures right here. Now, if we scroll down a bit, they talk first about the monolithic application, and that's pretty much just putting everything into one big project like we did. Now, in this case, they actually did split it up into some minor setups right here. They have some data layer, some models, some services, some views right here, but still it's only a single application, right? It's only a single project right here under a big solution. That's not good enough. We want to kind of split that into multiple projects, and we're going to try and do that. So that's the first thing I want to do. Now, I did that in 2017 already, so you can just go and start watch these videos if you want to, but I did it with the tree-layered architecture, which is not perfect for dependency injection and dependency inversion principle. Don't worry, I'll get back to those words as well. So let's scroll down. What can we do? Can we start working with something called layers? Yes, we can. So this is, again, the good old traditional tree-layered architecture, or they call the N layer because you could have multiple layers. You could add service layers, you could add a lot of different layers onto this, but this is kind of the basic layer idea, right? So we're going to, I've already made videos about that, so I'm not going to jump into that, but this is kind of how you would then structure your application with multiple layers, as each of them would be a project. So think of each layer right here as a project and a solution in this case right here. Sweet. Let's scroll further down because then they start talking about how that would work and how you would implement it. But then we get to something cool, the clean architecture, the new idea, right? The new guy on the street that we are going to start using in this series right here instead of the old tree-layered architecture. It's also called the onion architecture now and then, but it's kind of, they have the same idea. They have in the center of everything, you have the domain logic. So think of it this way, everything that has to do with the actual application, everything customer specific, domain specific for the application, we're going to place that in here. Then we're going to add an infrastructure layer down here, and that's kind of going to be the road to persist the data. The place where we put logging, the place that we put stuff that's required to run an application, because we need to save our data, right? But the domain, the core of the application doesn't need to know anything about how you save the data. You could save it in a data file, you could save it maybe just as an XML file on your machine, you could save it on a database, like we're going to end up an SQL database, but it could also be a Mongo database. You could save it using transactions if you want to. You can also skip transactions if you don't want that, etc., etc. So there's a lot of information about how you store and retrieve data that has nothing to do with the application core. Okay? User interfaces, that's also pulled out of the domain model, or the domain, the center of the application right here. So we put that on the outside, and you end up with something looking like this. So this is the new clean architecture, showing the same setup that we did with the tree-layered architecture. Now, again, I know this might not make sense yet, but think of it this way. The core is at the bottom now. If we go back up here, notice the difference. In the old version, the data access layer was at the bottom, meaning that the data access layer was actually the lowest layer in the old setup, meaning that this was the thing that this guy depended on, and also a lot of time this guy depended on. But now in the new setup, everybody depends instead on the domain logic, the center, right? So everybody depends on that inside the application call right here. So that means that the infrastructure will depend on this guy, the test will depend on this guy, and the user interface. So this will be the heart of the entire application. This might be a tough one. But don't worry, as we start moving forward and I start making this architecture, we'll come back to it and I'll try and show you why I'm doing what I'm doing, right? And this is just an example code of that. And here we put in the unit test into our onion architecture right here. They talk a bit about the infrastructure. Now I encourage everybody to read this very, very simple page right here to kind of get a deeper understanding of what I just talked about. Go in and read this. It's 20 minutes of your time and it's worth it. So before we show up in the next video, please go and read this, and then we'll start building our actual architecture to start making this good old application right here into an actual layered application to make it easier to reuse, easier to extend later on in the future, and also make it easier for collaborators to actually work together in the source code. See you next time. We'll start working with an actual clean architecture. Have fun.